Hey everyone, what up? Mad Kaiser here, and welcome to the third episode of my Ninja Gaiden review marathon. With, well, Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge, a title that's both bold and very, very divisive. Now, as stated in my last review, Tomonobu Itagaki left Tecmo due to various conflicts, and I would leave the direction of the series to both Fumihiko Yasuda and, most notably of all, Yosuke Hayashi. And he basically wanted to take the series to new heights, especially with the third game, it delving into Ryu's humanity, while also being accessible to new folks, and, well, catering to the Western market, and competing with this year's Devil May Cry title, that being Devil May Cry DMC. Oh no.
Not in a million years.
And a funny thing to note as well is that Ninja Gaiden 1 Black was actually even released in the same year as Devil May Cry 3, and then Ninja Gaiden 2 was released in the same year as Devil May Cry 4. So it's no wonder they were pretty much rivals. Well, not now anyways. Anyway, the game was also unveiled at the Tokyo Game Show in 2010 with only one image shown. It showed a teaser of a blood-ridden Ryu pulling his mask. And Hayashi would later give more detail, saying, "We are trying to have people enter the real Ryu Hayabusa. The amount of blood doesn't revolve around the idea of killing people. It could also be Ryu's blood. We're not focusing on not only cutting people, but also on Ryu himself." Devs also had the idea to cut the ability to delimb foes, as a member of Team Ninja stated that
We don't do that here.
Then around E3 2011, it was revealed that the game would also feature both competitive and cooperative multiplayer modes, both supporting up to 8 players. A demo of the fighting game, Dead Alive 5, packaged with Ninja Gaiden 3, would feature Ryu Hayabusa as was Ayane, Hayate, and Hitomi.
Oh yeah!
While the 360 version will let you play as Hayabusa and Hitomi, while the PlayStation 3 version would have just Hayate and Ayane playable. So if you got the collector's edition of Ninja Gaiden 3, you'll have all 4 characters playable. There were also even DLC packs released through April 2012, which would feature new weapons, armor, headgear, as well as even new items, and later, new Ninja Trial minigames released. Ninja Gaiden 3 would release on March 20th, 2012 on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, selling around 630,000 units. But also it would cater to a downright mixed to negative reception, with scoring a very low 58 on Metacritic, with many critics, let alone fans, vocally criticizing the game for being a huge downgrade in gameplay, especially coming off from Ninja Gaiden 2, as well as also having some very baffling gameplay addition, on top of also a very convoluted and nonsensical story that just felt counterintuitive. As such, to salvage and possibly win back the public trust after their massive blunder, they released a newer version called Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge in the same year, on the Wii U.
What the hell is this?
But it's okay, because later that year, they also got Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge on 60 and PlayStation. And basically, this was the Ninja Gaiden Sigma 3 or Ninja Gaiden 3 Black. I know some people are going to argue me with that, but that's what it is. And this essentially adds all the features that were cut from the vanilla game, making the combat on Power 2, as well as even toning down some of the more bizarre story choices and gameplay aspects, as well as also adding new characters in the form of Ayane, as well as even for the first time, Kasumi would head their live franchise.
Oh yeah!
Yeesh. Anyway, and oh, let's not forget Momiji as well, which is so amazing. Razor's Edge would prove to be a success, reviewing with a much better solid 70 on Metacritic, and many saying that this should have been what the original was from the start. and likewise, this would be released again on the Master Collection alongside Ninja Gaiden 1 Sigma and Sigma 2 in 2021 for both PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and PC. And for this review, just like with the last two games, I'm going to be reviewing the 360 version once again on my backwards compatibility on my Xbox One S. But with that said, let's falcon dive towards an enemy, do some kunai climbing, and grab a sword as we head straight into Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge. So the story has our main hero, Ryo Hayabusa, get contacted by the Japan Secret Defense Force to infiltrate a new criminal organization. However, it was all a trap, as a mysterious masked regent battles and places a curse on him, called the Grip of Murder, which not only dissolves Ryo's dragon sword, but also impulses him to kill in order to survive. However, over time, that curse will eventually consume and kill him. Upon that, Ryo and his newfound allies learn that the LOA want to create a new goddess that will eventually destroy the current world and remake it. So with that, Ryo travels through the world to stop the LOA's plan and see whether or not he's truly a murderer. And that's the story. For this, however, they wanted the story to be more deeper and narrative focused. They even have been writer for the NES games and even famed RPG scriptwriter Sato Kato heading the story, with it delving towards Ryo's humanity while still trying to be bombastic as, well, the last two games. However, sadly, the story still isn't that great. For one, the whole Ryo's humanity and him questioning a murderer, it just feels so out of place, especially towards the third game, whereas the last two games, he had no qualms of killing, as his enemies were all evil, and they were trying to kill him. And he didn't kill any innocent lives per se. Not only that, but Ryo doesn't really question the whole murderous aspect in this game, as he's more concerned of stopping the LOA and trying to rid this whole curse to begin with. And it's not like killing in this game has much consequences. There was a scene in the original base game that had him cut down a helpless soldier who surrendered, though eventually that was scrapped in Razor's Edge, in fact that Ryo would never ever do that, as while he doesn't show any mercy towards his enemies, it's most of the fact that the enemies he faces show no mercy towards him. It feels like they wanted to give him an arc of overcoming something. I just don't feel like they were committed in that, when his stories were less about that. It was more so about the epic and badass adventures, with Ryo taking down the nearest foe and saving the world. Even the first game put his vendetta and revenge thing in the background. Also, the killing aspect bears no fruit, when also his enemies are also evil and in no way sympathetic, and arguably they have killed as much as Ryo has in this game. So what's the point really? Also, the tone of the story is very, very serious, with things like the easing of the stakes, as well as the curse itself, and also that he lost his sword. But also, it's also having this weird tone where you have to also stop the birth of a god, as well as also globetrotting like in the last game. And you can definitely tell that the seriousness and the bombastic elements don't gel towards together nicely. But with this, it just drags, and while it does have some nice, cute and touching moments, it's just not enough. And it just shows that 3D Ninja Gaiden isn't meant for profound storytelling, even if they desperately try with this. I think this is also a similar issue I have with Bayonetta 3, where they try to go out with a serious tone, but also having the fun moments that the last two games had. But however, like with that game, it just falls completely flat in so many levels. It just tries to do so much, and it just doesn't pay off in a satisfying way. As for the characters, it's mostly positive. Now regarding Ryo Hayabusa himself, I've seen that many people say he feels a little bit out of character, as he feels more talkative, passive, similar to the portrayal of Master Chief in Halo 5, and even how Samus was treated in Metroid Other M. Ah, that explains it. and in some ways, they're not necessarily wrong. As going for the past two games, Ryu is less talkative and more colder and sterner when he chooses, but he can subtly show compassion and concern towards his allies. While in Ninja Gaiden 3, that whole compassion and concern aspect goes to complete overdrive, to the point I think that Ryu feels like almost a different character. And while it does have its cute moments here, especially towards Mizuki and Kana, and even the entirety of Day 5 was absolutely phenomenal, other times I think it's a bit too much. And I'm not against the whole idea if that led Ryu to be a more older and wiser figure in this game, much like towards his father, but really, he's not, as he's actually just a little bit older than he was in Ninja Gaiden 2. Though he still performs some badass moves. Now, as for the side characters, we pretty much got a whole new lot of new characters. From our new main heroine, Mizuki McCloud, and overall, he's pretty solid. And to this game's credit, he actually does have a lot more going to it as a character. Other new characters like Ishigami, Kana are also fine, though the real stars are the returning characters, like Ayane, who gets her own short story here, teaming up with Sonya, and honestly, that aspect feels like true Ninja Gaiden. As well as also Momiji, who also appeared in both Dragon Sword, as well as Ninja Gaiden 2 Sigma and Black, and of course, Dead or Alive 5.
Oh yeah!
Anyway, as I was saying, there's also even a character from the original NES games that even makes a small cameo here, which is cool. Now, as for the villains, well, to be blunt, they absolutely suck, as they're both boring and just evil for the sake of it, with no standout personality or even imposing doom that makes you terrified of them. Even if they, on paper, do pull some feats that make them a force to be reckoned with. But really, all in all, I just couldn't really care less about them even if I tried. Ashte here is absolutely bland, and with the little screen time he actually has, he just doesn't make a lasting impression. Lovelace is just another evil hot scientist because, well, they just needed one apparently, and well, he also doesn't last too long. There's also another character, but that's also spoilers, so we're not going to talk about him. And then we also have the Richard of the Mask, who's essentially the rival of this game. And while he does make a good, strong first impression, thematically, having a whole gesture figure contrast with a ninja makes for some really interesting parallels. His dialogue at times can feel both annoying and grating, and especially towards certain boss fights. Though there are some aspects of him that work fine, but sadly I just feel they were also on debate, much as the whole story was. Now as for the voice acting, everyone is in top form here, with this time award-winning voice actor Troy Baker taking the helm as Ryu, also voices him in both Dead or Alive Dimensions and Dead or Alive 5, alongside Michael McConaughey as Shigami, and Stephanie Shea as Kana.
Oh, it's just that I thought, well...
You just call me ma'am? Are you trying to start something?
Oh no, while the story did have potential, sadly the execution was really botched. Now we get on to the graphics, and I have to say, this game really looks phenomenal. The character models, as well as everyone looking their absolutely best here, especially Ryu's design, who looks absolutely wonderful, as well as both Ayane and two other characters.
Nice.
As well as this game has more variety in color and more nice looking levels than even some aspects of, well, Ninja Gaiden 2. And once again, they're all based on real life locations. Now as for performance, it definitely does run at a near perfect 60 FPS here, with a few hiccups here and there, and some parts that did cause some slowdown, but they're not noticeably too bad or anything. The UI is also pretty good, most of the time, as the main menu, karma screen and health all look really cool, but everything else just looks so bland in my opinion. All in all, Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge still looks pretty good. Now we get on to the meat of the game. So Razor's Edge plays similar to Ninja Gaiden 2, with many of the core mechanics and overall combat flow feeling almost the same, which is pretty good. And also ironic cause based Ninja Gaiden 3 threw almost all of that into the bin, but regardless, this game still plays pretty good for the most part. However, that's when the similarity ends, as Razor's Edge plays around with some of the traditional mechanics, one of which being based on healing. Now in this game, traditional healing items as well as essence are pretty much gone. So the two primary ways of healing is one, using your Nimpo, which now will get filled after killing or dealing damage towards enemies, and by hitting them will restore your HP. And another new mechanic is the newly introduced Steel on Bone, where enemies will glow red to perform a red devastating attack, and if you dodge at the right time and counter with a heavy attack, you get to insta-kill them, as well as nearby enemies, to do a massive chain. And the more you kill with this technique, the more HP you'll gain back. So if you do get hit by them, it will deal a lot of damage and chunk to your max HP. As well as try not to counter too early, as that will cancel that mechanic entirely. Another is also the Bloody Rage system, where the more you kill enemies through obliteration techniques or even the Steel on Bones, that system will increase until it's very high enough. And there you can instantly perform a level 2 ultimate technique much faster, and can deal a lot of damage. Upon that, also weapon shops are also gone, and the only way to obtain new weapons is either progressing through the story, or even collecting the golden scarabs, which make a nice return from Ninja Gaiden 1 Black, and upgrading them to unlock new techniques, which includes the famous Izuna drop.
KO.
Classic. Though how you get these new skills and upgraded weapons is by gaining ninja skills, which works basically like a skill tree here, and you get to spend karma points, which you earn by doing things like combo kills, evasion, obliteration, ultimate, and Steel and Bone move. Projectile weapons also make a return here, with now using auto aim, and thus it makes it my favorite bow controlling thing in the series. But it's not just Ryu you're playing as, but you also get to play as Ayane. And while she only has one weapon and Nimpo, her moves and skills and overall gameplay is so much lighter, faster, and even better to control that just compensates for those shortcomings greatly, with her being a massive highlight. The gameplay itself is still pretty good, with the enemies at the forefront being aggressive, well, aggressive especially when you come across dialogue like this. Ranging from soldiers to morphines, black spider ninjas, as well as homunculi and alchemists. And more often than not, they do tend to be challenging to take down, and mostly are fair. So all in all, the gameplay in Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge is still a blast, as much as the other two. That being said, however, there are still some issues that really hurt this game. Now, first off, let's talk about that healing I mentioned. Because while it does provide a new risk and reward system, the problem stems is the fact that gaining Nimpo feels way too slow, as well as the new Steel and Bone mechanic is only dependent if your enemies use it or not. Sometimes they do, but other times they don't. And that part barely carries to some boss fights. And there's also the thing like the whole grip on murder sections, and while it does feel addicting at times to chain and pull these moves, it later does become both tedious and a downright slog. It just doesn't require too much thought. Another big issue is because of no healing items. If you're not careful with your health, you are gonna have some terrible time with bosses that have multiple phases. And while most enemies are tough but also fun to fight, the alchemists are absolutely garbage and they're just an absolute pain in the ass, as well as the snake enemies. And also, the camera is really bad, especially towards certain gank fights. And yes, there are also abundance of QTEs. Ah yes, QTEs, my favorite. When doing boss fights and certain set pieces, you have to perform these. But because they're so quick, if you blink and miss it, you get penalized very greatly. Upon that, the game will have moments where the gameplay will drag to an absolute crawl, and it's just downright unbearable. I get that from a story perspective, but man, it's just not so much fun, is it? Also, how come Ryu has one moment where you get to go stealth in the first level, but then never again? He's a ninja, for God's sake. And then lastly, the biggest issue of this game is once again the bosses. Oh wow, Kaiser complaining about the bosses in the Ninja Gaiden game. What's next? He's gonna tell us the grass is green or the sky is blue? Now, to be fair, there are some decent to good bosses in this like with 1 and 2, but the problem with the bad ones here boil down from either feeling too dragged out, having multiple segments, QTE phases, or just having back-to-back boss fights that just bite you in the ass, especially if you're not careful with your health. So it becomes a nightmare to fight. Things like the helicopter, the dinosaur, Ash Tear's back-to-back fight, and the second phase of the Ryu's clone fight are just absolute hell. But however, there is one boss that's so borderline miserable and has really sounded me on the game that's arguably the worst boss fight I ever come across in the entire series. And that is the final boss. And you know what? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This boss fight just fucking sucks. Even more so than the Death Worm in Ninja Gaiden 2, as well as even Giga Death and Agorodai in the last game. As well as even Hydra Boss and the multiple worms. Hell, even Ghost Doku Ninja Gaiden 1 Black is more fun to this. Seriously, fight. Honestly, I would never unleash this to my even worst enemies. Christ! Anyway, with that rant over, there were some good boss fights as I mentioned, like the Spider Boss and the first tutorial, as well as the Imperfect Goddess, and the multiple fights with the Regent of the Mask, but the latter becomes in the same tier as Genshin when it comes to the best boss fights in the series. And they really carry this whole boss line, which I guess comes with the territory, but man, I hope with Platinum Games at the helm with Ninja Gaiden 4, the boss fights are at least decently more fun than the worst ones we have in this series. But overall, while the gameplay for the most part is really still good, there are still blemishes that keep it from being my absolute favorite. Now we get on to the level design, as well as the rest of the gameplay. As for the movement and general physics, they're on par with Ninja Gaiden 2, and mostly control well. With of course the exception of the kunai, which is very clunky and just not fun, as well as other things like the falcon diving, evading, and sliding through objects, which is pretty cool, not gonna lie. But as for the levels, it's once again mostly linear, with some alternate pathways, which lets you find things like more gold scarabs, as well as crystal skulls scattered. So really, it's on par with Ninja Gaiden 2 in terms of the level design. Now we get on to the soundtrack, and you know what? It slaps. With having a mix of dramatic as well as also heavy metal themes, it also helps to the tone, as well as intensify with the encounters. So on par with Ninja Gaiden 1 and even Ninja Gaiden 2, this soundtrack absolutely goes hard for all the quibbles I have with this game as a whole. But with that, here's an amazing sample. As for the content, since this is basically the definitive version, there's a lot, and arguably, it's where the game is most fun at. The obvious incentive to replay through the levels on high difficulties to get much better scores, even if the whole ranking system is kinda gone. Well, kinda. And if you have the Xbox 360 version, there's also online co-op, where basically you and a buddy could play through missions together during the ninja trials. There's also the Crystal Skulls, which you find in the game, and they basically serve as enemy gauntlets where you face mobs of foes in familiar locations, and they end up with a boss from the previous games. But arguably the best thing about this would have to be the chapter challenge, where you get to replay stages as either Ryu, Ayane, but also Momiji, and also making her playable debut in Ninja Gaiden in history, Kasumi, the main protagonist from Dead or Alive.
Oh yeah!
Okay, can I ask everyone to please stop saying
Momiji?
this courtroom? Cause the fucking guy's gonna keep showing up.
Anyway, and the latter three are just absolutely so much fun to play, with their very own unique movesets, weapons, and skills. And the best thing about this mode, the horrible final boss isn't even present at all. A standard run can take you around say 9 to 12 hours with some side content, but if you do everything, you get essentially 34 hours max. So with that, how is Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge? Well, out of the entire trilogy, this game has left me conflicted, even with my tempered expectations going in. When the game gets really good, it really gets good. But when it's bad, it's really painful. The campaign is both a mixed bag, with overall mostly great combat on par with 2, as well as the Ionic sections being an absolute blast here. But the story and questionable characterization of Ryu, alongside some very egregious design choices in the gameplay department, do mar it. And where I had the most fun in this game would have to be in doing the extras and side content. And that part alone reminds me of the good old days of both Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2. I do admire the devs of trying to do something new and bold in the series, but at the same time, you can definitely tell this game was chasing trends, with the abundance of QTE, set pieces, and other elements that feel close to both Bayonetta and even a year before the release of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. On top of adding things that I don't think makes the experience all that much better. It by no means is a bad game, and if you can tolerate all of the missteps, you can get some enjoyment out of it, on par with even Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2. But all in all, it pains me to say this, I'm disappointed that I didn't like it more than I would have, and thus, it's my least favorite in the entire trilogy. So, I'm gonna give Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge a decent 3 Mizukis out of 5. Anyway, that wraps up the third chapter in this marathon, and as for many faults and issues Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge has, the next game, however, is unfortunately going to be a whole lot worse. As next time, we'll tackle the weird, the problematic, and the very infamous Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you play this game yourself, let me know in the comments of what you guys think about it. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, comment if you're someone new, as well as subscribe, and hit that notification icon if you want to stay up to date for more reviews like this. I'm on my socials, and you can also follow me on Patreon and support me there if you want ad-free videos and other goodies. Until then, special thanks to my patrons, and Mad Kaiser, out.